I'm interested in knowing your thoughts on, how can news outlets do a better job of reaching more people, particularly people who maybe are not inclined to be reading mainstream news outlets. How can we do a better job of expanding, what Ijo mentioned earlier, sort of the tent of who our journalism is for?
Let me get a let me try that. But you know what, Matthew, that's a very good question. That's what I worry about. That's what I am thinking about every single day. That's what I also think about before I sleep. Are you reaching the kind of audience that we want to reach? Is this a critical mass? Is this the audience who will have a say, whose say will have a weight in the next elections? Are we communicating to them the way that they would understand us? Are they tired of how the news sounds? So all I have are questions, really. So that's a question you pose for me. I'm gonna pose more questions. So this is something that we've been exploring here and there in little experiments. Some have been successful, some not so. We will try to experiment more, because there are some signs that the little experiments that do succeed can lead us to something better in how we present information to them. But I think it is also very necessary in this day and age. How can our news be more, can reach more people than fake news would ever reach? Perhaps the language and the packaging of false information is more attractive, or or better. I won't really say better, but more attractive, or more, they get more reactions than real journalism. And that is a concern, because of course there's also the matter of algorithms favoring this kind of packaging for false information. But at the same time, what lessons can we learn, and how false information communicate to people, and get the best bits of it and make it news, make it true, make it the kind of reporting that will help them as citizens in their own decision making every day. So yeah, more questions also.
I really agree with Camille that that's something that we go to sleep with every day. Like that's the holy grail, like reaching the unconvinced, reaching the mass based. But I think there are two factors there. One is capacity, also because, well, we have to um, we have to contend with capacity, like what can we do, I mean, what can we with our current resources do? But at the same time there's also creativity. So it's really like like it's something that we challenge ourselves with all the time. What are the limits? Because like on one, you have to understand, for instance, attention. When you're talking about this, you need to understand the dynamics around the attention span. So like what will get people to actually view things? And the reality is, even in broadcast, for instance, media that are really like significant in terms of reach, there are types of content that get a lot of attention versus certain types of content, right? And people will always gravitate towards, people fighting, or brawling. That's a challenge, for us, versus like, some very boring thing like, learn about how the budget affects you, right? I mean, like, that's my coverage. And to be honest, I have learned to live with lack of attention in that very important topic. So I think those are the things that we need to contend with. And we try as much as possible to be creative there. But and I think this is where there are things that need to go beyond just the journalists, and having other sectors come in also. So just as an example, for instance, when we did our fact checks, we've been getting a lot of these feedback that, hey, why don't you translate your fact checks into Filipino? But even if we translate them into Filipino, if it's in text, will people read? That's a big question. So lately, we've been experimenting with why not convert it to video that's Taglish. We're still struggling, okay? Because you're talking here about video content on YouTube that already have amassed like millions of views versus like a fact check that has only a few thousand views, and that's really the holy grail we're trying to crack. So it's I think we need to do more experiments, but that's really ano, like you need to take that thing with a grain of salt. At the end of the day, it's also about people learning to pay attention to things as well that need attention. So there's really quite a lot of thinking around that needs to happen.
Some foreign media have actually been experimenting with recent developments in technology. Aside from delving into Instagram, for example, you have some international media actually putting up stories on YouTube, on Facebook, on IG, or now on Twitter, just in an attempt to get more readers, get more viewers to their content. That could be one, but I think what's happening now in the Philippines is that you have to differentiate the kind of audience that we have on social media with the kind of audience that we have on broadcast. Because usually on broadcast, you just turn the TV on and then you have the news on your background. You could just listen in if you want to. You could select what you want to tune in, but it's there. So the content is there and the audience reception is passive. So there's an advantage to that in a sense that you get to have them listen to what you're reporting on. Whereas on social media, it tends to be more active. The engagement it will have to depend on the interest of the reader, and will also depend on the algorithm for that particular social media. So it's trickier to try to get their attention there because if you have incendiary language, if you have juicy content coming from, say, bloggers who tend to favor a particular side, you actually lose out because your bland content is not as appealing as their incendiary content. And this is one aspect actually that was already talked about in 2016. There was a move for PCOO to actually accredit bloggers. But the bloggers, part of that move was actually to regulate the kind of content that they post, which means they can't post offensive language. And they objected to that. You know, the reason that they cited by one pro-government blogger, it will diminish their reach because that's what people are looking for in their content. The ability to actually cuss, to call people names. So they actually acknowledge that part of their appeal is to be able to offer offensive content to their core audience. So that's problematic for me. That's something that we have to deal with as traditional social media, as traditional media.
So those are all really, really great points. And I just have one more question before we move
Sorry,
to the Q&A.
Matt.
Oh, sure. Yes.
Just to add to the previous
Sure.
question.
Go ahead.
Sorry. So your question was, how can journalists do a better job of reaching more people? Theoretically, we have to remove the barriers to free and open discussion. And of course, that includes having an unrestrained and healthy media and having citizens or providing under-resourced people with the communication skills and technologies that they need to tell their own stories and stick their own claims for social justice, for example. And that includes instruction and media literacy. When you look at agenda-setting media, the so-called agenda-setting media that we have now, most of them are part of corporate media or are linked to big corporations or big conglomerates. So they have the capacity to go to the provinces, send their correspondents, or have their own views there. But smaller media units don't have that power, that don't have that economic power. So it's really a balance of maintaining or fighting the repression of the press and enabling journalists in newsrooms to have a fair advantage in covering the news. And at the same time, informing citizens as well by giving them the agency to stake their own claims.
If I may add as well, with social media, there's a lot of ways that newsrooms can innovate, but especially with small newsrooms, there's the challenge of resources and manpower. I mean, you have Twitter, Instagram, you have fleets now on Twitter, as well as TikTok, which some newsrooms are at least that I know of in the US are trying to get into to get news content into or fact checks into. But that I think it's important to also see that that only reaches a certain demographic, maybe middle class people, young people, or millennials. But here in the Philippines, who else are we missing out on reaching? Maybe people in the provinces. Like one barrier we have is that we have tons of languages. And in Verifiles we only have English articles, and sometimes we translate them into Filipino, but just those two languages. So there might be a need to try to get out more content in other languages, or um, have a I mean, there's a lot of good community media. The challenge though is that they are being attacked as well. They're being red tagged or terrorist tagged. But yeah, I think there can be and there can be an effort if resources and manpower allows for us to reach more people by coming up with content in other languages. I mean, just what Ija said, media literacy is important, and we came out with a video tutorial series recently on how to fact check. And apart from English and Filipino, we translated it to Cebuano and Ilocano as well, to try to break that barrier as well.